on the weekend against Scotland. And I do want to ask you about those players, Chuck.
Yeah.
Who of maybe what you want to call the fringe players were you impressed by, and who do you think missed an opportunity?
I think the two names that we just mentioned, I think they stood out in terms of Villaroo and Mapimpi because they're not new players, but in terms of where we've shifted to, they're the bit part players. And I think with Villaroo, that was a rolling back of the years because when last did we see such a touch of class? Because usually he's just tidy and everything in front of him is good enough to score us for those points. So I think that kind of performance is good. But for me, Andre Esterhuizen and Ulrich Loh, I think those are two standout performances for me where I can say, okay, those guys put in a shift because at 13, next to Lucanio M, who's also trying to re-establish himself in terms of, hey, I know there's Jesse, I know there's DLN there, but I also want some of that in terms of that position. But he put his hand up quite firmly, made a lot of carrying meters, ran and bashed into those boys, and he was there, he was visible. Ulrich Loh, look, I don't think the pack worked effectively in terms of them at the breakdown. I think we were a bit disjointed. I think you could tell, one, we were rusty, and two, there wasn't that cohesion that you're used to when you have your Sia and your Peter Steph together, and you're like, okay, I know what I'm getting from each player. So with this one, was a bit of a mix and match with Kwagga Smith in there, and who else was there in the 8th jersey? I'm forgetting, but
Van Staden was in the 6th, Kwagga was in the 8th.
Thank you. Van Staden, Ulrich Loh, and Kwagga, Ulrich Loh, and Van Staden. Thank you. So I think we lacked a bit of cohesion at the breakdown in terms of being there. I think hence the penalties conceded in those moments. But I think Ulrich Loh played a very good game. Also, Thomas du Toit, I think he was good. I mean, obviously, our front row is massive in the scrum, right?
It's hard to fault what these guys are doing in the scrum, and then he scores a try as well in that match.
Yeah. So I think those guys for me were spectacular.
Yeah, Chuck, I have to agree with the names that you put up. Low is he's going to be a staple in the green and gold going forward, based on what we've already seen from him this year and in that matchup. And in that loose trio, he was the only one who had a good game, in my opinion. Van Staden keeps getting chances in the green and gold. I don't quite think he's the answer in terms of what we're looking at behind Sia in the number 6 jersey. And he's got his opportunities, but he's failed to put his hand up. And then in terms of Kwagga Smith, I do think Kwagga Smith is a bench option. I think what he gives you, that energy and that spark that he gives you from the bench, doesn't quite translate when he's playing from the first whistle. It was playing in his 50th test, kudos to him, but I do think his role is cemented as he's one of the bomb squad, because also he does then cover the back line, especially when we go to a 7-1 split. And in that 7-1 split, while the Achilles that you saw in terms of another player who didn't quite impress was Hendriksen, right?
Yeah.
And we couldn't risk taking him out early because we only did have like the one back to replace him on the bench. But yeah, Chuck, he was slow in his distribution and he wasn't giving us that good go forward ball. In my opinion, I do believe when Williams came on, he added a spark, and I think he has to start next week. I think the halfback options against England should be him and Kobus. I think Hendriksen, as I'm saying, like he failed to put his hand up. And then very disappointingly for me, Chuck, is Lucanio M. I keep waiting for Lucanio M to come back to his absolute best form that took him to the top of the world in terms of not just as a center, but like maybe the best player in the world. But it does seem like the firm of Dialenda and Grill is very firmly entrenched in the 12 and 13 jumper. And then I'd also single out Moody. He had a shaky start to the game, but he finished the game very well, particularly his work in the air. That was very impressive. But I do think those guys left a lot out on the table, and I don't think they would have shifted the needle in the main in terms of getting the coaches to wonder what direction they want to go within their options. Esterhuizen, most impressive of the backs, as you mentioned. Mapimpi as well, of course, with his 2-try effort. But overall, I do think we'll have a bunch of changes against England. We'll see, of course, your Peter Stephs, your Sia Kolisis come into the starting lineup, and some of these guys, like Kwagga, revert then to the bench. But we got the win, and we got some game time under us, and I hope and I expect that we're gonna continue the pain for England, who lost now back-to-back close games against New Zealand and the Australians. In fact, the entire Northern Hemisphere had a particularly horrid weekend against the Southern Hemisphere teams. The only one to win was France, but they were playing Japan. So in terms of Argentina, Fiji, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, all of them won against their Northern Hemisphere counterparts. And as I'm saying, long may the dominance continue.